Hi everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever you are, right? I'm here very happy to be with Yuri Castro, who is the co-host of the program Seeds of Knowledge. Hi Yuri, how you doing?
I'm very good, Marcia. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everybody.
Awesome. Yuri is here to discuss, as you can see in the screen, how many loaves do you have? And he will provide this spiritist perspective to the teachings of Jesus. And it's such a pleasure to hear about such topic. And I wanted to just welcome all of you who are interested to also dive deeper into those messages, right? To understand how Spiritism brings consoling messages around what Jesus brings to us. And as you can see, this is another episode of the Seeds of Knowledge. And you all awesome in how you bring so many clarifying messages to it. We Yuri, before you begin, I was just trying to say when Jesus asks, right, how many loaves do you have? At a high level, we're talking about almost literal. It's a story about the miracle. It's a story about feeding, nourishing us, right, as part of that crowd. But the question that I bring to you, and I hope that you can perhaps bring to everyone else, is what does he really mean, right? And to me, there are two messages. Please correct me. Number one is Jesus bringing the notion that you can create more from what you already have, right? And even if it's a yes, it's a crowd of 5,000, depending on the biblical story, right? 4,000 or 5,000, but that crowd of say thousands of people, and all you can have is three loaves of bread, right? It seems so small, it's so insignificant, and yet the story is it's not. It's what you have, and you can make so much with it. But the second question that comes to my mind is the idea that it's really an invitation for us to reflect on ah, gratitude, faith, trust, even the resourcefulness that comes with the divine providence, right? Divine mercy. But Yuri, I don't want it to take away from your time, so I'm going to go to the backstage and really look forward to hearing from you. And thank you, everyone, for being with us today.
All right, great questions, Marcia. Thank you so much for starting the conversation because we're going to be talking about the Spiritist view of the miracle of the multiplication of the bread. And yes, this is a question. So the title was drawn from the passage in the Bible where he asked, "How many loaves do you have?" And the invitation here today is to answer those two questions that you already mentioned. So, first, I want to say that I wanted to bring the actual passages here for us to understand one the context. So, how did it occur? In what context did the miracle occur? And what was the significance of that specific miracle, even for us nowadays? So we have one of these instances in Matthew chapter 14, and this is after Jesus had learned that John the Baptist had been beheaded. So Jesus decided to go meditate. He withdrew by boat privately to a place of solitude. But hearing of that, the crowd that was following him, that was always eager to hear him, to get some of all of the abundance that our dear master had to always offer, they followed him. So this big crowd followed him. And when he saw the crowd, he started his exhortations and he healed the crowd and everything. But that happened throughout the day. And then as we see in Matthew here, as the evening approached, the disciples came to him and said, "This is a remote place, and it's really already getting late, and it's already getting late. Send the crowds away so they can go to the villages and buy themselves some food. So this was the concern that the disciples had brought to Jesus in that specific moment, where they wanted him to send the crowd away because people needed to get food. Maybe they didn't realize, being so entrenched in the whole experience with the master, they didn't realize that they were going to get hungry and there was nowhere nearby. They couldn't just order food like we do nowadays. So they said, they got to walk, tell them to go out and go away so they can feed themselves. And Jesus says, they do not need to go away. You give them something to eat. And here comes the first question, or the first reflection we can make. Why did Jesus tell them for them to give them something to eat? There was a crowd, like you said, Marcy, in the beginning, the crowd of thousands of people, thousands of eager souls there. Jesus knew that the disciples weren't bringing with them hundreds of carriages of food or carts with food to feed them, but he still told them, you give them something to eat. And this is something I want you to sort of like store for a second, because we're going to come back to that. The disciples were taken aback. They said, we have here only 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish. And then Jesus says, bring them here to me. So they said, this is all that we have. And Jesus told them, bring them here to me. And Jesus directed the people to sit down on the grass, taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, and looking up to heaven, he gave thanks and broke the loaves. Then he gave them to the disciples, and the disciples gave them to the people. They all ate and were satisfied, and the disciples picked up 12 basketfuls of broken pieces that were left over. So this is where the miracle therefore occurred. This is when we see what happened actually when Jesus multiplied the bread. But it's interesting, there's a few components here, a few actions that we can think about. One is he's telling them to bring the bread to them. The other one, he's talking about how, he's looking up to the heavens and he's just saying, this is what we're going to do, almost like in a sequential manner. So he took those, looked to the heaven, gave thanks, and then broke the bread. And then there was the multiplication there. He gave them to the disciples, who then gave them the bread to all the people that were there. They all ate and were satisfied, and the disciples picked up 12 basketfuls. This is interesting because it says here in the passage that everybody was satisfied, but there were still pieces left over. There was still, dare we say, a miscalculation? Or maybe was that another message that Jesus was trying to teach? The number of those who ate was about 5,000 men, besides women and children. So there was 5,000 people there that were hungry, or were becoming hungry, and Jesus fed them all. In Mark 8, we have the similar passage. They said that the multiplication of the bread happened on multiple occasions. So this one here, they're talking about this. They're saying, during those days, another large crowd gathered. Since they had nothing to eat, Jesus called his disciples to him and said, I have compassion for these people. They have already been with me 3 days and have nothing to eat. So imagine, people were with him for 3 days and not feeding on much. And he says, if I send them home hungry, they will collapse on the way, because some of them have come a long distance. So this was the master once again looking after those who were there, hearing him. So his disciples answered, but where in this remote place can anyone get enough bread to feed them? And then comes the question that is the topic of today, when he asks them, how many loaves do you have? They replied, 7 loaves. So he told the crowd to sit down on the ground. And when he had taken the 7 loaves and given thanks, he broke them and gave them to his disciples to distribute to the people, and they did so. They had a few small fish as well, so the loaves and the fish. He gave thanks for them and also and told the disciples to distribute them. These people ate and were satisfied. Afterward, the disciples picked up 7 basketfuls of broken pieces that were left over. About 4,000 were present. So, here once again, we're talking about a very large crowd of people gathered, hungry, and Jesus getting some of the loaves, just a little bit, and with those crumbs, he multiplied into basketfuls that fed thousands and thousands of people in a remote place. So Jesus was taking care not only of the spiritual need, but he was also taking care here. We can even think about this, about their material needs, the needs of the flesh, the needs of the body. So in this situation as well, there was leftover. Why was there leftover perhaps? Nothing with Jesus was done randomly. He did everything that he said, everything that he did, being the spirit that he is, and with all his capabilities that we still do not understand. And it's going to be a long while before we understand everything that he's capable of doing. He wouldn't just do that at random. There is this idea as well, and we can think further here, that the basketfuls were there, or meaning like the leftovers were there for a reason. So Jesus took a little bit from the people, giving thanks to the Father. He broke the pieces multiplied, and there were leftovers, meaning everything that we had, we ask for from the Father, we receive not only one to one, we receive way more, and there's always abundance. There's always abundance in the grace of the Father. And the message that sort of inspired me to do this specific topic, or this specific talk with the loaves and the multiplication, this one came from the book Words of Eternal Life, which is a book psychographed by Chico Xavier, written by Emmanuel. So it's a book of messages. And then this one, number 9, he's going to talk about help. And Emmanuel says, let us observe that the Lord, in front of the hungry crowd, does not ask his companions, how many loaves of bread do we need? But rather, how many loaves do you have? First time I read this, I was taken aback. I had never thought of that. That he didn't ask how many they needed, but instead, how many do you have? It's interesting because Jesus could eyeball the crowd and he would know how many people were there, but he didn't say how many do we need. He said, how many do you have? So it's interesting for us to think again, every message that's behind Jesus's actions. And Emmanuel is going to bring this to our attention, brought it to my attention for sure. And I decided to share with everybody through a talk. Emmanuel is going to say that Jesus cautioned his disciples to the need for something to be presented to the divine providence as the basis for the help we beg for. This is the message of today's talk, this specific paragraph here. This understanding that Jesus did not ask how many breads do we need. He said, how many do you have? This is the first, how many loaves, do you have? This was the first question that he was asking. This is the message, because even as Emmanuel says, the master, managed to feed thousands of people, but he did not do such without the crumbs that the apostles offered him. There is no point, he's going to say, in asking for the blessings of food by immobilizing your arms in the ice of laziness, as it is completely inappropriate to ask for the talents of love burning your heart in the fires of hatred. So there's no need for us. There's no result that's going to come from us asking for something, for the divine providence to give us something, without us actually doing something for that. Emmanuel, again, he said the master fed thousands, but he wanted to give the message to the disciples that there was something that they needed to give in order for that to be multiplied. There was something that needed to come from them. And then we think, Jesus being a spirit of the first order, for like only class, all of that, the top of this in the spiritual evolutionary scale, he could very well manipulate the fluids. He could very well manipulate the matter. He could have created the bread. He could, if he wanted, he could have definitely created the bread. But still, he asked for the very little that the apostles had. So we think, and Emmanuel is going to say here, however, for this, it is necessary to offer him the resources that you have already managed to accumulate within yourself for the extension of progress and for the victory of good. So this is the message, specific message of today. This idea that in order for us to receive what we need, receiving what we ask for, because there's a difference there, and I'll explore in a second. We need to provide something, just like the apostles provided 7 loaves, in another one 5 loaves, a couple of fish. Here, a very tiny fraction of what was really needed for a crowd of thousands. But Jesus did not dismiss the little that they had. And that's something that I want us to really think about and really internalize, that whenever we're trying to help others, as Jesus was helping those people, because he wasn't multiplying the bread for himself. He was multiplying for the crowd. Whenever we're trying to help others, whenever we're trying to really spread the love, spread the message, spread, all good actions, Emmanuel's going to say that the Lord will not do without the help, however small, that he must find in us. That's it. No matter how small we think our help is going to be, no matter how small we think that what we have is it's not gonna amount to much. I only have this. Doesn't matter. We need to give something, because we have no idea that if that small thing is gonna turn into something big, and how much that small thing, and I'm doing quotation marks, is going to be helpful to people. In the Gospel according to Spiritism, Kardec is going to tell us that effort attracts the divine grace. So effort attracts that, and he makes the comparison with a magnet. I wanted to bring the visual here. He's saying that, sustained and persevering efforts attract the blessing of the Lord. It is a magnet that calls to progressive grace, abundant blessings, and all of that, and gives us strength to climb the mountain. He makes an analogy of that nature. How it is the effort that's going to attract the divine grace. It's not being just doing nothing, like we said, we saw with Emmanuel before, with our arms immobilized, or just with our hearts as hard as stone and waiting for something from the outside to happen for us to change. No, something needs to come from us. And Kardec even uses another analogy in the same idea, talking about somebody who received a field, a big land, rural land, from their father, and Kardec asks, if this field does not produce, whose fault is that? Is it who's to blame? Is it the person? Is it the father who gave the field that needed to be taken care of, that needed to be tilled? Or is that the son who received the field, who had the air had the field covered with weeds, but didn't do anything, just let the seeds, he says, rot due to lack of care? Can he blame the father that gave him the field for the lack of production? Absolutely not. So again, the analogy that we receive a lot already, we have already received a lot, but it's up to us to till the field. It's up to us to take care of the field, to remove the stones, to remove the weeds, to plant the seeds when they need to be planted, to take good care of the plants so they grow and they generate their fruits. So there's this idea that even if we're asking, or when we're trying to do something, we have to give something in return. And in the book, The Living Spring, another book by Emmanuel, psychographed by Chico, there's this message number 89, on our journey. And Emmanuel's going to say that we often fail at our commitments and thus greatly increase our debts. Yet in our redemptive endeavor, we beg the Lord for his mercy, compassion, and help. And that is very much true, isn't it? We often fail at those commitments that we make before we reincarnate. We make all these plans. We say, well, I'm going to work on this virtue. I'm going to expiate that which I need to expiate. And then we come here. We often deviate from the path for one reason or another. And then we beg the Lord for mercy, compassion. Please have compassion of me. Please help me. And we do that while reincarnated and also in the spiritual plane. So there's this idea that we're asking for something. And a man is going to say, it is natural for us to ask for the Master's, in this time Jesus, help in our afflictions and difficulties. Meanwhile, let us not forget to work for the good on the most painful passages of rectification and ascension, convinced that we invariably find ourselves in the most just, beneficial, and deserved opportunity of work, and that maybe for the time being we do not know how to choose anything better. We very often receive the help that we need, which is not necessarily what we ask for, but the help that we need, we always receive. We have that at our disposal, and we too frequently we fail to recognize that. It is natural, he's saying, for us to ask for help. But let us not forget divine justice. Let us not forget, he's saying here, that we invariably, Emmanuel is very categorical. He doesn't leave room for doubt. He's saying we invariably find ourselves in the most just, beneficial, and deserved opportunity for work. If that was not the case, we cannot say that we believe in a just, perfectly good God. Because God doesn't play favorites. What we have at our disposal, which is more than what we realize, and we should be grateful for that as well, is something that we often don't know. We often don't pay attention to. But we are in the most just, beneficial, and deserved. Deserved by what? Who says that? Divine justice, what we worked for in previous lives, in the spirit plane, all of those things amount to what we have at our disposal. But the message is that we have so much. And even if we think we don't have enough, let's remember the couple of loaves of bread were able to feed thousands, became thousands and thousands of food items, and some fish as well. This spirit, Amelia Rodriguez, who wrote through Divaldo, she described Jesus in this situation when he was doing the multiplication of the bread. And she said, this is her description. She's saying, slightly pale, he seemed to be transfigured. He took the loaves and the fish and broke them and distributed them before the astonished eyes of those closest to him. Can we imagine what it was like? Can we try to imagine the minds of the people that were seeing that happening in that moment? She said that they became distributed and multiplied, and then she talks about how everybody was fed. So she says everyone approached happily, and baskets are presented. They fill them and share the harvest with the people, who feed themselves until they are full. And there is enough left over to fill more baskets with what remains surplus and abundant. Again, the message, Jesus is saying, if you ask for the Father's grace, you're going to be satisfied, fully satisfied. He was showing how through the bread, perhaps through something material, how you could be satisfied and still have left over. So our Father, who is just, who is good, perfect in all his qualities, will provide even more than what we need. We're going to be satisfied, we're going to be full, and we're going to have leftovers. And even in the book Genesis, Kardec is going to talk about some of the miracles of Jesus. And with the multiplication of the bread, he even talks about how there was this idea, or there's this idea that whenever let's imagine people were there, they were tired, they were starting to become hungry. So like in the passage in Mark, it says that people were following for 3 days without food. Even in that situation, we can imagine how whenever we're very hungry, and we're very preoccupied perhaps. But when we're doing something that is very calming, something that we truly enjoy, we may even forget sometimes that we're hungry. Have we never worked perhaps, or read a book, or become engaged in an activity that we kind of lost track of time, and I forgot to eat. I was hungry and I forgot, or I was sleeping, now I'm not. Things like that. So Kardec even alludes to this idea that Jesus' words were so strong, his magnetism was so powerful, and the creatures, he says, the creatures that followed him were so eager to hear him, that it wouldn't be surprised if by the words and the magnetic action of his words, and the power and the effect he had over people, would be enough for them to feel satisfied perhaps from the need of the body. So he brings even that component of Jesus saying that. And one can argue as well that that could be the case when he says to the disciples, you, in Matthew we saw that, when he says, you give them something to eat. What was the message there? Again, I already mentioned that Jesus was very well aware that they didn't have hundreds of carts of food following them around so they could give it to people. Why was he telling the disciples to give them something to eat if they were in a remote place? Perhaps this also meant what Jesus was saying, as far as you have it within you to feed the hungry. You have within you to satiate the hunger of the spirit, that is often translated into the hunger of the body. So that's something that, when he says, you give them something to eat. So he also wanted perhaps to teach his disciples to feed the people through their words. And they did. As we know, a lot of what happened with the disciples that were closest to him. Additionally, Emmanuel, once again, this is the book, The Way, the Truth, and the Life. He's going to talk about another aspect of the multiplication of the bread that perhaps also goes unnoticed to a lot of us. He's going to say, they were there, and everybody was hungry, and the disciples were gathering, and then the disciples, he says, Andrew then brought to the master a boy who had 5 barley loaves and 2 fishes. So this idea, when he says, you bring to me what you have, Emmanuel says that this is what happened. Jesus, however, receives the morsel, believing in its priceless significance. That's why he asked for, okay, how many loaves do you have? And then when they said the number, which was a very, very tiny fraction of what was needed, he says, bring them to me. He tells them to have everyone sit down, and for there be order and harmony. The greatness, and I put this one in bold because Emmanuel says the greatness of this lesson is profound, because here Emmanuel is also drawing our attention to something that I too did not realize the first time I read this passage of the multiplication of the bread, one in Matthew, one in Mark. He says, that starving for peace, people beg for the Christ's assistance. They talk about him, they pray for his help, and wait for help to arrive. But this is what Emmanuel is going to say. We are unable to establish inner order so that we may receive the heavenly resources. So we become despaired, we become hungry, and we can make the parallel between being hungry of the spirit and being hungry of the body. And we do not want to listen to the invitation to calm ourselves. So we don't sit down as Jesus asked them to establish the order. Because he said, he told them, everybody to sit down, kind of divided them into groups even, to show exactly the need for calmness, the need for patience in times of need, and for order to bring some of that, for order and inner peace to be able to allow us to receive the help that we so desperately need. And this is something that like I said, when I first read that, I never realized why he asked them to sit down. If people want to eat standing up, let them eat standing up, we would think, right? But there's this notion that sit down, calm down, sit down, maybe sit among groups, let's bring some order, some calmness. And then he broke the bread, and then he distributed the bread as well. Emmanuel is also going to tell us that faced with the legion of hungry people, any man would experience invincible discouragement, considering the crumbs of 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish. Who would not have despaired in a moment? Who would not have just shook their heads and said, there's nothing we can do. Let everybody go away, and that's it. And obviously, we're talking on a very material, from a very material perspective here, but we can definitely expand that into something more spiritual whenever we're faced with a legion of 5,000 sad people, 5,000 desperate people, 5,000, if we were faced with those, right? So what do we do? And then Emmanuel is telling us how Jesus used his immense power of kindness and managed to feed everyone abundantly to the point where it just everything, even there was even leftovers. So Emmanuel is then talking about how the crumbs here that we think that we have when confronted with the desperate crowd of thousands of people is way more than what we realize that we actually have. It's way more than what we need, truly. And he's going to say many apprentices recoil when faced with the extent of the task. However, if the faithful servant walk towards the Lord, the crumb of his lights is immediately supplied by the miracle of multiplication, since Jesus, considering the spontaneous offering, will bless his small offering, allowing him to nourish crowds. So Emmanuel is talking about the power of faith, the power of love when combined with dedicated action. Faith and love, meaning the desire to do good, to help others, combined, with dedicated action. It's not just wanting to help, to feed the hungry. It's not just having faith that the Lord will provide and maybe people will be helped, but staying put. There needs to be dedicated action. And then also Jesus showing them once again how if you give me a few, if you give me just a little bit, if you give me crumbs, I can help you and I can help crowds become full and their hunger satiated. So Emmanuel is going to finish this by saying it is essential, however, not to doubt our minimal possibilities for good. Our crumbs of goodwill in the willingness to serve when led to Christ are worth more than all the multitude of evils in the world. Because one day that multitude of evils will become good. We march towards progress always. It's unstoppable. It's a law. It's the law of progress. But we need to do our part. We need to, and I put in and I bolded here, we need to give the Master, give God our crumbs of goodwill, the faith and love combined with dedicated action in this willingness to serve, because then we're going to see that everything is going to be multiplied. Jesus did not dismiss the little that people had, He always took into account what people had to offer, and he wanted to teach us, and he taught so many that. And we can even think now, bringing to Joanna de Angelis, who wrote Through the Hands of Divaldo Franco. She talks about how there is this need. I mean, there are two, and I put the image of pillars here. There are these two very basic things, these two pillars. Whenever Jesus was trying to heal those that were ill, whenever Jesus was trying to heal those that wanted to be healed from him, he needed them to want. So there's two things, and Joanna's going to say these are the two pillars that were needed in order for the sick person to be healed by Jesus. Number one, they needed to want to be healed. And she says that to want is to make a decision, is to abandon the parasitic complacency of fear and just taking on new responsibilities, breaking the chains. Joanna says that those who want invest in doing so, they act in a way that will lead to the results that they seek. Let's remember, and I always say this is one of the to me, one of the beautiful passages that we have, the woman that got healed just by touching Jesus's hem, part of his clothing. The want in that situation with this woman came from the fact that she made her way to the crowd, the woman that was bleeding for 12 years. She made her way to the crowd. This want is what drives the decision. It's what drives the action for us to get the help, for her to get the help. And the second pillar is to believe. This is directly tied to faith, but it's also a serious decision, one that reveals, Joanna's going to say, emotional and human maturity. So it reveals, this maturity that we achieve because the belief is innate within us. The belief is already within us because we are created by God. So we have the divine spark within us. We have that. Didn't Jesus make the analogy of the mustard seed, comparing that to faith? So whenever we want something, whenever we need to get healed, whenever we're trying to reach something or help somebody, there needs to be these two pillars. Want, do I really want it? And am I doing the effort necessary? Do I believe that I'll get it? Remember that Emmanuel said faith and love and dedicated action. That's it, faith and dedicated action, just here in two different words. Do I believe? The woman that came to him had such a strong want because she was making her way through the crowd just to touch his clothes, and she had faith. She had the belief that his power would heal her, to the point where he even stops and he tells his disciples, "Somebody touched me," and they were taken aback. Master, everybody's touching you. What are you talking about? It's like, no, somebody touched me, and he meant in this way that this woman was healed just by that, by the want and the need. And the other one that is very very talked about is the one where the paralytic person was healed. So this one, he, thinking about the want and the belief, he came to Jesus. He made all his friends help him to create a stretcher of sorts, and Jesus was in the pool of Bethesda. This is in Jerusalem back then, where there were a lot of healing happening there, a lot of cures and miracle cures, because when, depending on the tides and how the waters will rise up and down, people would bathe in those waters and they would get healed. So let's stop and think for a moment. So people would bathe in waters and get healed. The want and the belief. Making the effort to go to the waters. Really believing that those waters would heal them. So the want and the belief. So Jesus was healing people there. And there was this question that he would always ask the people that he would heal. Do you believe I can heal you? Or what can I do for you? And when this person, there was this paralytic, who was somebody who had been a paralytic for 38 years, was born like that. When he came to Jesus, asked to be healed, Jesus says, Nathanael ben Elias, do you believe I can heal you? And this is from the book Prelude to the Divine Kingdom by Amelia Rodriguez. Ben, B-E-N, means son of. So Nathanael, son of Elias, do you believe I can heal you? And Nathanael, the paralytic, said, yes, I believe. So we already had the want and we had the belief. He says, yes, I believe. Lord, how do you know my name? And then he realizes that Jesus, this man he never seen before, that was performing miracles, had talked to him and called him by his name and knowing his father's name. He says, how do you know my name? Do you know me, Master? And he says, yes, I have known you since forever. I am the good shepherd that knows all the sheep the Father had entrusted him with. And I really love this passage, because this is Jesus telling him how he knows you and he knows all of us. And this begs also to the question that we have seen on lectures and talks and books before in Spiritism, where people were, question, why didn't Jesus heal everybody? Or like, what were some of the parameters or the prerequisites, perhaps? Well, the want and the belief was one, but the second one, or the third one, if we think of want and belief as separate ones, was the fact that Jesus would never break the law of cause and effect. When the person that was healed was the one that wanted, that believed, but also could be healed given their reincarnatory planning. He would never break that. So that's something for us to realize too. And also the fact that Jesus had often told people, like, do you believe I can heal you? Or he would give speeches before healing people. So a lot of them didn't want to hear the speeches. They just wanted to be healed, or they weren't interested. So there is also that point as well. And in the book, Our Daily Bread, talking about faith and dedicated action, Amen is going to say that it is interesting to note that of all his disciples, the master regards most highly those who listen to his teachings and actually put them to practice. From this, we may conclude that people of faith are not only those who are prodigious in words and enthusiasm, but those who also display attention and goodwill in light of Jesus' teaching, studying their spiritual content in order to apply them in their daily endeavors. So it's not just about saying beautiful things and speaking with enthusiasm and wanting to change and all of that, but also displaying the attention and goodwill in light of Jesus' teachings, studying the spiritual content, but also applying them in the daily endeavors. So it's not just being still and like, oh, this is so beautiful. I love this book that I read. I love this talk that I heard. It all makes sense. Or even giving these talks or writing books or doing whatever it is to spread seeds of light, but also not doing, but at the same time, not doing the action necessary. So then I put some questions for us, some reflections for us to think about here. How many times have we asked, but contributed nothing in return? How many times have we asked through prayers, through thoughts that we send to our Heavenly Father, but we have contributed with nothing. We have given nothing in return. Or how many times have we asked, contributed with something? So we gave something, but still did not receive what we hoped for. So I'm praying, I'm asking, I have the want, I have the faith, I gave something, the faith and the dedicated action, but I didn't receive what I expected. I wasn't healed. I didn't receive the blessing I was expecting to receive. How many times? And then we have to remember here as well that oftentimes this happens because, I would say more often than not, I dare say, because we often think that we know what we need, but we don't know what we need. We know what we want. And we don't have the patience to wait sometimes. We don't have the resignation necessary oftentimes to understand that things happen in God's time. Things don't happen in our time. Things don't happen at the pace that we would like, more often than not. But that's not to mean that there is no fairness or justice. That just means that we don't know those things truly. And we try to understand, we try to exercise the virtues, but this is something we stumble upon. How many times, this is the third one then, have we asked? We gave something back, we received the blessing, but have gone back to the same mistakes. How many times have we had the want, the belief, we received the result, but then we all fall back into the same mistakes? Amelia Rodriguez is going to say that Nathaniel Ben Elias, the paralytic that was healed after 38 years of having that issue, that deficiency, he went and he was not in good company, doing not very elevated things, even though he received that thing that he wanted so much. So he was going back to the same mistakes. And this is what happens with us oftentimes. And this is for us to think about. And the question, what would you like me to do? When faced with a hungry crowd, Jesus asked his disciples if there was any way they might be able to feed them. He was obviously looking for something that would serve as a basis for materializing the help they needed. How many loaves do you have? This question shows the need for some kind of concourse in the work of multiplication. Of course, we need to give something. And then when we give that something, Jesus multiplies that. God and in his infinite wisdom and love multiplies that. This image compels us to think, Imran is going to say, compels us to think about how important our cooperation is so that the heavenly benefactor may enrich us with his gifts of abundant life. Can the Christ build a sanctuary of happiness within us and for us if he cannot count on the basis of the goodwill in our hearts? How can that be possible? How can that be established? We need that dedicated action. We need to give something. Many people hope for a miracle, a man is going to say, from the Lord to satiate their hunger for peace and comfort, but the Master's voice on the mount still resounds unforgettable. What do you have? That's the voice that echoes in our conscience whenever we're being spoiled little spiritual children, just asking and asking and crying and becoming upset when we don't get, but we're not doing anything for that result. Or we're not understanding what needs to be done. And even if we do, we squander the blessing that we receive. So, what do you have? This is what the voice that echoes in our conscience. God's goodness is infinite. Still, something must emerge, and I put in bold there, something must emerge from ourself on our behalf. Emmanuel, so this is the message here today. When we're trying to accomplish anything, when we're trying to do the work of the good, let us offer Jesus at least a few scraps of personal effort. Then we can be sure that the Lord will do the rest. And with that, I just wanted to thank everyone who watched this. I hope this was helpful, and I wish everybody a blessed week.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I love your reflections and wanted to know, do you have final words or even a prayer before we close our time together, Yuri?
Yes, final words. I guess the message was, I went over and over, but this idea that faith and love and dedicated action. So we need to pair that. We need to give something, even if we think it's something that's small. We need to give that from ourselves, from our hearts, from our effort, so that the Lord can multiply it, so Jesus can help us, and everything will come in abundance, which is the
Yes,
beautiful message as well.
I do love the message. Thank you. Thank you so much, Yuri. Thank you, everyone. And we'll see you next episode. Bye.
Thank you.